me a moment. What care I who makes the laws of a nation? Let those who will take care of its rights and wrongs. What care I who cares for the world's affairs, as long as I can sing its popular songs? Let me sing a funny song with crazy words that roll along, and if my song can start you laughing, I'm happy, happy. Let me sing a sad refrain of broken hearts that loved in vain, and if my song can start you crying, I'm happy. Let me croon a low-down blues to lift you out of your seat. If my song can reach your shoes and start you tapping your feet, I'm happy. Let me sing of Dixie's charms, the Swanee shore and mother's arms, and if my song can make you homesick, I'm happy. If my song can make you homesick, I'm happy. Thank you. It's spring 1881. One of the most important events to affect 20th century popular music has taken place. Alexander III has ascended the throne as Tsar of Russia. One of his country's biggest problems was an absence of export trade. Alexander came up with a revolutionary solution. He decided to export his population. Within weeks, he was exporting Russians like there was no tomorrow. Mostly these were Jews, but he wasn't fussy. Into this delightful environment was born Irving Berlin in 1888. He was the youngest of 8 children, and the family was living in Tumen, Siberia at the time. Not a good idea. This was, in fact, an illegal settlement, and this made them prime candidates for Alexander's resettlement program. They were invited to leave by Cossacks, who came and burnt their house down. Moses, Isaiah's father, had to make a choice. Stay where he was, no home, no town, no job, serious prospect of becoming a Cossack kebab, or leave town. Must have taken him all of half a minute, I reckon, to decide to go. But where? Well, he had a relation in America who seemed to be doing pretty well. And everyone else said, hey, this is the place to go, America. So it's 1892. Moses, his wife, and 6 of the 8 children, 2 stayed, set off for America. They arrived a year later in 1893 after a terrible journey, which would take all evening to describe. And they arrived at the newly opened Ellis Island in New York. Here the family name was changed, magically, to Berlin. Heaven only knows why. But apparently this sort of thing was pretty common at the time. Did Moses ever have great timing? He thought, like his famous namesake, that he discovered the promised land. Afraid not. Nothing could have been further from the truth. He arrived in America at the height of the worst depression in the country's history. Worse still, you have to realize that because of Alexander III, there were an awful lot of Jews arriving at the same time as Moses. Between 1890 and 1900, 4 million arrived in New York alone. Moses was a cantor, and cantors were a dime a dozen. So he scraped a living as best he could, and the family lived in the very poverty-stricken Lower East Side of New York. All this was a bit much for Moses, and unfortunately he died very quickly. He died in 1896, when his youngest son was still only 8. Time to go to work. While most of the family sweated in the rag trade, Isaiah, familiarly known as Izzy to the family, became a newsboy with the Evening Journal, for which he received 1 cent a copy. Now, on one occasion, he was daydreaming. He'd sold about 5 copies, and he was stood on the pier by the East River, staring into nowhere in particular. 5 cents, newspapers. He didn't see the crane, which propelled him, his 5 cents, and his newspapers into the East River. He was fished out, and a good percentage of the East River was pumped out of him. But what shocked everybody was the fact that he still had the 5 cents in his hand. Thus are the habits of a lifetime formed. Izzy sold newspapers until he was 13, and he put his earnings into his mother's apron at the end of every working day. But he couldn't be a newsboy forever. Goodness knows, he couldn't be a boy forever. While selling newspapers, he discovered what he wanted to do next. He wanted to be a singing waiter in one of the many cafes in the Bowery district, and this was right next to the Lower East Side. His mother was shocked. But undeterred, he left home, and he got a start that he wanted in Mike Salter's Pelham Cafe in 1903. So what was the music of the time? Well, it was the heyday of ragtime, epitomised by the prolific Scott Joplin. Singing waiters took popular songs and adapted the lyrics to amuse the cafe patrons. Normally, these would be risque or just downright rude. Young Berlin combined a ready wit with a good understanding of language picked up on the cultural melting pot that was the Lower East Side. He very quickly fitted in at the Pelham. Competition between the cafes couldn't have been tougher. In 1907, Mike Salter found that the Pelham was losing customers. It was losing customers to a nearby cafe called Callahan's. Why? Well, Callahan's had a theme tune. It was a tune written by their pianist, a chap called Al Piantadozzi, and their main singing waiter, who went under the rather dubious title of Big Jerry. Salter acted swiftly. He got his pianist, Nick Michelson, and young Izzy Berlin together, and he said, look, come up with a tune for the Pelham. It's either that or go. The result was a song called Marie from Sunny Italy. It would be hard to imagine a less auspicious start for a man who was to become the most successful popular songwriter of the century. Marie earned Izzy the princely sum of 38 cents. However, it was important for 2 reasons. Firstly, he realized that what he really wanted to do was actually write songs. He didn't want to mess around with other people's material. He wanted to do his own. And the second thing is that the name that appears on the music is I, Berlin. Why he chose this name? Nobody seems to know. Nick Michelson's name also appears differently on the manuscript as well. It appears as Mike Nicholson. Generally, this was done actually to sort of appear more American. Izzy officially took the name Irving Berlin in 1911. His relationship with Salter ended abruptly a few months after Marie, when Salter fired him for falling asleep at the till. Over the next 4 years, he collaborated with a number of musicians and established a reputation as a lyric writer of novelty songs. Some of his songs were even accepted for Broadway shows. Now, I should explain here that Broadway shows in the early 1900s were not as they are now. That's a comparatively new invention. In those days, they were much more like sort of the music hall of this country. They were typically revues, and they'd have lots of different singers and performers doing their tricks and playing with dogs and goodness knows what else. And the songwriters would be multitudinous, and they would provide songs for specific acts. So it was a very different environment, much more like revue. Anyway, Irving Berlin's first success was in 1909. And at the time, he was working with Waterson and Schneider, the New York publisher, and it began one evening. He was having a drink with another songwriter called George Whiting, and they came out of John the Barber's cafe on 45th Street, and Whiting suggested they should go to the theatre. He said, "Look, my wife's gone to the country." "Hooray!" Irving shouted back. He stood still, and he said, "I think we've got a song here." The theatre was forgotten. Instead, they went back to Irving's office on 37th Street, and they worked all night on the song. They even managed to enlist the musical help of Ted Schneider, and by early morning, the song was finished. And it had its first performance at a restaurant next door called Maxim's. Now, Maxim's was a sort of typical one of these theatrical haunts, so it kept some fairly strange hours. Anyway, this is what they would have heard. When Mrs. Brown told hubby, "I just can't stand the heat. Please send me to the country, dear. I know 'twould be a treat." Next day his wife and family were seated on a train, and when the train had started, Brownie shouted this refrain: "My wife's gone to the country, hurrah, hurrah. She thought it best I need a rest, that's why she went away. She took the children with her, hurrah, hurrah. I don't care what becomes of me, my wife's gone away. My wife's gone to the country, hurrah, hurrah. She thought it best I need a rest, that's why she went away. She took the children with her, hurrah, hurrah. I don't care what becomes of me, my wife's gone away." The song was an instant success. So much so that the Evening Journal, and if you remember, Irving Berlin was a newsboy for the Evening Journal, they commissioned a further 100 verses. God knows why. Which Berlin dutifully supplied for a suitable fee. The song is essentially about adultery, which was apparently a growth industry in America around about the 1900s. Tin Pan Alley folklore has it that George Whiting's wife divorced him because she took exception to the lyrics of the song. George didn't go on to greater things other than to write one other hit, My Blue Heaven. Lyrically, it would be hard to imagine anything that was more the complete opposite of My Wife's Gone to the Country. And indeed, it was suggested that this was intended to make up for My Wife's Gone to the Country. But since My Blue Heaven wasn't written until 1927, one can only say he left it a bit late. There will always be songwriters who push the boundaries of propriety. They desire to make people laugh and be shocked at the same time, and Berlin was no exception. And he didn't care whether he did this from a male or a female perspective. And here are a couple of songs from the early period of his career to make the point. Mary Snow had her beau, he was bashful and shy. She simply couldn't make the boy propose, no matter how she tried. Mary grew tired of waiting, so she called her beau one side. While he stood there biting his fingernails, Mary cried, "If you don't want my peaches, you'd better stop shaking my tree. Let me say that you're mighty slow. You're as cold as an Eskimo. There's 1,000 others waiting to propose to me. So if you don't want my peaches, you'd better stop shaking my, better stop shaking my, better stop shaking my tree." The male side. When the Sultan goes out on a spree, he presents me with the harem key. Every Turk in Turkey envies me, for I've got the best job in Turkey. I'm the guy who guards the harem when the Sultan goes away. I'm a conscientious Turk, and my heart is in my work. The Sultan tells me that I earn my pay. When he's gone, I keep them happy, and it keeps the wheels a-working in my knob. And if the Sultan never saw the way I got his harem, he would go out and engage someone to stand guard over me. I'm the guy who guards the harem, and I wouldn't take a million. No, I couldn't take a million. No, I wouldn't take a million for my job. Yes, you did hear what you thought you heard. I guess it meant the same then as now. Like I said, he liked to shock. He also wrote another song called "How Do You Do It, Mabel?" on $20 a week. No, it wasn't about careful housekeeping. It was about now that he started to write not only the words, but also the music to his songs. And this was remarkable, because he never learnt to play the piano properly. According to his eldest daughter, what he did was he'd play thirds in his right hand, which is sort of typically, and single notes in the left. So what you sort of got was an effect rather like this. Not only that, but he generally used only the black notes. To change key, he had pianos especially made for him, which had levers, and they moved the keyboard. Several of these pianos still exist, and they were known affectionately by him as his Buicks, and they went with him anywhere he went, basically. When he'd written a piece, what he would do was he'd describe it to a professional pianist who would then complete the musical arrangement for him, according to his instructions. Now, throughout his career, he had some pretty amazing pianists working for him, some very, very fine musicians, and they all said the same thing. He had an awe-inspiring musical instinct. Typically, what would happen was they would come back to him and they would play back the piece that they'd arranged, and he'd say, "Stop, stop, no, that chord's wrong, give me another. No, another. And eventually he'd find the chord that he wanted. He'd say, "Yes, that's it." He didn't know what it was called, hadn't a clue, but he knew the sound that he wanted. On March the 18th, 1911, he copyrighted the song, which was to make him both rich and internationally famous. Come on and hear, come on and hear Alexander's ragtime band. Come on and hear, come on and hear. It's the best band in the land. They can play a bugle call like you've never heard before. So natural that you wanna go to war. That's just the bestest band. What am my honey lamb? Come on along, come on along. Let me take you by the hand. Up to the man, up to the man, who's the leader of the band. And if you care to hear that Swanee River played in ragtime, come on and hear, come on and hear Alexander's ragtime. Oh my honey, better hurry and let's meander. Ain't you going to the leader man, ragged meter man? Oh my honey, let me take you to Alexander's grandstand brass band. Ain't you coming along? Come on here, Alexander's ragtime band. Come on here, it's the best band in the land. They can play a bugle call like you never heard before, so natural that you want to go to war. That's just the bestest band. What am I, honey lamb? Come on along, let me take you by the hand. Up to the man, who's the leader of the band. And if you care to hear that Swanee River played in ragtime, come on and hear Alexander's ragtime band. By the time he wrote Alexander's Ragtime Band, Irving was already doing pretty well. Not only was he a successful songwriter, he was also a partner in a publishing business, the very same Waterson and Schneider, who I told you about earlier. They had promoted him and they changed the name of the company to Waterson, Berlin and Schneider. Alexander's was actually not an instant hit. It was dropped from a Folies Bergère show early in April 1911, where it had been introduced, strangely enough, as an instrumental march. Goodness knows. Even his fellow partners didn't initially want to release it. How wrong they were. When it was finally released in September, the public was already clamouring for the song. This followed regular performances by a very popular singer of the time called Emma Carew, and also by Irving himself. Overnight, it sold 200,000 copies at 10 cents a copy. Now that's about $20,000. Now remember, this is 1911. The sales that followed were phenomenal, and Irving Berlin was a millionaire by the time he was 23. As if all this success wasn't enough, in 1911 he worked for the first time with a musician called Ray Gertz, which led him to meet and fall in love with Ray's sister, Dorothy. They were married at the end of 1911, and they spent their honeymoon in Cuba, holiday haunt of the American rich. Come on along to Cuba, that's where I'm going. Cuba, that's where I'll stay. Cuba, where the wine is flowing, and where the dark-eyed stellas light their fellas, panatellas. Cuba, where all is happy. Cuba, where all is gay. Why don't you plan a wonderful trip to Havana? Hop on a ship and I'll see you in CUBA. Everything seemed to be going Irving's way, but, to quote P.G. Wodehouse, unseen in the background, fate was quietly slipping the lead into the boxing glove. the couple's happiness was not destined to last. Dorothy contracted typhoid fever, probably in Cuba, where it was rife at the time of their honeymoon. Her condition deteriorated despite the best of medical attention, and she died in July 1912, aged only 20. Irving was devastated. Ray Gertz decided the best thing for his brother-in-law was to get him away from everything. So he took him off to Europe. And it's not clear how long they were away, but certainly for several months. And during that time, Irving couldn't write anything. He just really couldn't bring himself to write at all. And even when he got back to New York, back in the publishing house, he still only went through the motions. Finally, he sat down and he wrote what he later said was his only song based on personal experience. And it was called When I Lost You. The roses, each one, met with the sun. Sweetheart, when I met you, the sunshine had fled, the roses were dead. Sweetheart, when I lost you, I lost the sunshine and roses. I lost the heavens of blue. I lost the beautiful rainbow. I lost the morning dew. I lost the angel who gave me summer the whole winter through. I lost the gladness that turned into sadness when I lost you. He never intended to publish the song. But when his partners heard it, they convinced him to change his mind. Why they felt it would work isn't really clear, since the waltz at the time was commercially out of favour. It was published, and it sold unbelievably. It also established an interesting fact about Berlin. In times of high emotion, he tended to show his emotion through waltzes. By the beginning of 1913, there were millions of copies in print. In popularity, it ran Alexander's a very close second. It also seemed to rekindle Irving's desire for songwriting. Perhaps he buried his grief by writing the song. Maybe. Anyway, late in the year, he wrote a very different piece, which also became a standard. I've had a mighty busy day. I've had to pack my things away. Now I'm gonna give the landlord back his key, the very key that opens up my dreary flat, where many weary nights I sat thinking of the folks back home who think of me. You can bet you'll find me singing happily when the midnight choo-choo leaves for Alabama. I'll be right there, I've got my fare. When I see that rusty-head conductor man, I'll grab him by the collar and I'll holler, Alabama, Alabama, that's where you'll step your train that brings me back again, down home where I'll remain, where my honey lamb am. I will be right there with bells when that old conductor yells, all aboard, all aboard, all aboard for Alabama. In the years that followed, leading up to the First World War, Berlin's output was prodigious, averaging at least 30 songs a year. Most of these continued to be for Broadway shows, and in 1914, for the very first time, he wrote all the songs for a show called Watch Your Step, and this starred Vernon and Irene Castle, who were very popular dancers at the time, the forerunners essentially of Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. Business for Berlin was good. Everything he touched was successful. He always went to great lengths to explain that he was a professional songwriter, not a composer. He wrote to order. Perhaps it's reassuring, therefore, to know that not everything he wrote was good. In 1917, he finished a song called If I Had My Way, I'd Live Among the Gypsies. It was never published. Indeed, it was only performed once by Berlin at a party in Greenwich Village in 1917, and forgotten. Well, so he thought anyway. 26 years later, in 1943, Hollywood came to Berlin and they said, we want to use this song. We're doing a film about Eddie Rickenbacker, the World War I flying ace. No one was more surprised than Irving Berlin to find out that the song was an underground hit. I mean, for a start, he'd forgotten that he'd written it. It turned out that a certain musical ambulance driver had heard the song at the party and had taken it off to France, and there he'd entertained Captain Rickenbacker's 94th Squadron, explaining that this was Irving Berlin's latest song, and they'd really taken to it. That was wonderful. They took it on as their theme tune, and hence the request from Hollywood. And who was the musical ambulance driver? Well, it was none other than Cole Porter, actually. Bit more about him later. By coincidence, 1917 was also the year he met another legendary composer, George Gershwin. Gershwin came to Berlin looking for a job. He wanted to have a job as a musical arranger for Berlin. I mean, as I explained earlier, he used a lot of them. At any time, he probably had about 4 arrangers on the go, and he'd ring them up at any time, day or night. And he said to George, he said, all right, he said, well, you sit down, you play me some stuff. At the time, George was 19. He was a humble song plugger at Timpan Alley. So he sat down anyway, and he played some of his own music. And Berlin turned him down flat. He said to him, son, he said, stick to your songs, kid. You're too good to be arranging someone else's material. Gershwin never looked back, and he remained a close friend of Berlin's for the whole of his life, which of course was somewhat premature, dying as he did in 1937, aged only 39. His last performance, strangely enough, was at a private party at Berlin's house. And he went home early, complaining of a severe headache, and he died in hospital just a week later from a brain tumour. We move forward to June 1918. The headline in the leading American newspapers read, US takes Berlin. No, the war hadn't ended. Irving Berlin had been drafted. Having become a US citizen in only April of that year, he must have felt a bit miffed, I would have thought. He didn't like the army. Particularly, he didn't like lights out at 10 p.m. and reveille at 5 a.m. In his own words, I hated it. I hated it so much. I used to lie awake nights thinking how much I hated it. considering that he did most of his songwriting at night, it must have been pretty awful. In true Berlin style, he wrote a song about it. Oh, how I hate to get up in the morning. Oh, how I'd love to remain in bed. And the hardest thing of all is to hear the bugler call. You gotta get up, you gotta get up, you gotta get up this morning. Someday I'm going to murder the bugler. Someday they're going to find him dead. I'll amputate his reveille and step upon it heavily and spend the rest of my life in bed. And then I'll get that other pup, the guy that gets the bugler up, and spend the rest of my life in bed. While many may have wanted to lynch him for his anti-army songs, and this being one of several, some inspired individual realised that this was a great way of actually earning some money for the army. So they set him to work making a review. It was called Yip Yip Ya Fank. Ya Fank, by the way, was the army depot where Berlin was stationed. The cast was actually a cast of about 300. These were ex-Broadway performers who, being in the army, had nothing better to do at the time. And the show ran for 32 performances. The only thing that stopped it running further was that the cast was shipped off to France. On the last performance, as it finished, they were all marched out and onto the ship that was waiting for them, and they were actually sort of held together as well by MPs, so they weren't going anywhere. Every night, Irving himself performed Oh How I Hate to Get Up in full army uniform to rapturous applause. Then, the war was over. Irving returned to his business. He was the main songwriter in the Ziegfeld Follies of 1919, and this contained a showstopper called A Pretty Girl Is Like a Melody. In the spring of 1920, he got a call from a friend and producer called Sam H. Harris. They had spoken on several occasions about working together, the most recent being when Harris had expressed his continuing interest in working with Irving while he was still in the army. Irving explained that he was in uniform, and while it was easy to get in, it wasn't quite so easy to get out. Anyway, in spring of 1920, Harris convinced Irving to become a partner with him and to build a new theatre to be called the Music Box, purpose-built for review. Much thought went into producing a really classy environment. No expense was spared. They were so obsessed with the image of the theatre that they overlooked one very important item, right up to just before the opening. They forgot the box office. The first of the Music Box reviews opened in September of 1921, and it was followed up by further reviews over the subsequent 3 years. And 1923 contained one of his most enduring songs, still heard on television today, as the theme tune to Birds of a Feather. In 1922, the person who meant more to him than any other, his mother Leah, had died aged 72. Following on from what I said earlier about Berlin emotional waltzes, he produced several waltzes in quick succession about this time, and these are two of the most lasting. Gone is the romance, it was so divine, 'tis broken and cannot be mended. You must go your way, and I must go mine. But now that our love dreams have ended, what'll I do when you are far away and I am blue? What'll I do? What'll I and I am wondering who is kissing you. What'll I do with just a photograph to tell my troubles to? When I'm alone with only dreams of you that won't come true, what'll I do? I'll be loving you always, with a love that's true always. When the things you've planned need a helping hand, I will understand always, always. Days may not be fair always. That's when I'll be there always. Not for just an hour, not for just a day, not for just a year, but always. When I'm alone with only dreams of you that won't come true, what'll I do? Thank you. On May the 23rd, 1924, he found himself last-minute replacement at a dinner party given by a society lady called Frances Wellman. He had been very much alone for a little while at this stage. His mother had died and there was no other love in his life. And he was introduced to a young debutante called Ellen Mackay. And on being told who he was, she expressed her admiration for his tune, "What Shall I Do?" Berlin gave her a look and told her the title, as written on the sheet music, already having sold into the hundreds of thousands. But he accepted her correction, saying, "Where grammar is concerned, I can always use a little help." In the words of his daughter, a spark was struck. The story of how they got together is as good as any Hollywood script. Over the weeks that followed the party, the couple became progressively inseparable. Their first date was at the Astor, where the orchestra played Berlin songs, as orchestras did everywhere they went. Surprisingly, it took until August for her father, Clarence Mackay, to find out. Well, today I reckon it would have been probably within 24 hours, don't you? Mackay ran the Postal Telegraph Cable Company. Founded by his father, the company had been responsible for breaking Western Union's monopoly and had made the Mackays astoundingly wealthy. Clary Mackay was a Catholic, and at the centre of American society, he was livid when he found out that his beloved Ellen was in love with a Jewish songwriter. Worse than that, he was 15 years older than her. He instructed her to stop seeing him. She refused. Mackay took her away to Europe, standard trick in those days, hoping she would forget. But the European orchestras played Berlin's music, and through her friends and his friends, she sent letters to him every day, and he sent letters back. Either in spite of or because of the enforced absence, their love for each other grew stronger. And it's amusing to note that she sent her cables via Western Union rather than using her father's company, for obvious reasons, one suspects. When she returned to New York in about February 1925, the press were now loose on the story. This was great. The darling of Broadway and the rich debutante. Better than that, you got the hostility of the father. Wow, wonderful. One story suggested that Mackay had threatened to cut her off and that Berlin had said this wouldn't be a problem because as soon as they got married, he was going to settle her with $2 million anyway. Mackay hired detectives to follow Berlin around 24 hours a day in the hope of getting something awful on him, all to no avail. Suddenly, on January the 4th, 1926, the lovers were married in City Hall with no fuss. It was all done in such a great rush that Irving didn't have the $2 to pay for the license. Still had the 5 cents, I expect, but Ellen held onto her purse. She said to her daughter years later, "It seemed to me a poor way to start married life, paying for my wedding license." As his wedding present, he gave her the song Always. Not a bad present when you think that in 1946, the 20th year of her ownership, the song earned $65,000. It's likely that up to that time, the song had earned her in excess of $1 million. Think what that'd be worth today. Following the elopement, Clary Mackay didn't speak to his daughter for several years, and he continued to despise Berlin. The Berlin's first child, Mary Ellen, was born in November 1926. Things were looking up. Blue skies smiling at me, nothing but blue skies do I see. Bluebirds singing a song, nothing but bluebirds all day long. Never saw the sun shining so bright, never saw things going so right, noticing the days hurrying by. When you're in love, my how they fly. Blue days, all of them gone, nothing but blue skies from now on. Blue skies smiling at me, nothing but blue skies do I see. Bluebirds singing a song, nothing but bluebirds all day long. Never saw the sun shining so bright, never saw things going so right, noticing the days hurrying by. When you're in love, my how they fly. Blue days, all of them gone, nothing but blue skies, nothing but blue skies, nothing but blue skies from now on. Blue Skies was published in 1927. It was actually written by Berlin in December 1926 and dedicated to his daughter, to Mary Ellen, Christmas 1926. Blue days, all of them gone, nothing but blue skies from now on. He then put it away in his trunk, as he used to describe it. What he did typically was he wrote songs, and if he didn't feel they had a moment for them currently, he'd just put them away. He'd file them and bring them out later. Always seemed to remember what he had there, but he had quite a file. Flo Ziegfeld was putting a show together at the time called Betsy, with the music being done by Rodgers and Hart, and it wasn't going very well. The main singer was a lady called Belle Baker, and she was married to a chap called Maurice Abrahams, who happened to be a very old friend of Irving Berlin's. Belle was very unhappy, and she got hold of Irving, and he said, "Look, Irving, I don't like any of these songs that they've got for me here. Will you write something for me?" Being very obliging, he said, yeah, he would. So he pulled out Blue Skies from the box, and he went over to Belle's place, and he, Belle, and Maurice, they worked on the song all night, and it was finished the following morning. And that night, the opening night, it stole the show. Unfortunately, Rodgers and Hart hadn't been told about this. They weren't very pleased. Apparently this wasn't untypical for Flo Ziegfeld to let this sort of thing happen, so they didn't hold it against Berlin. But neither of them spoke to Bell Baker for the next 12 years. 1927 was also the year of the first talkie, The Jazz Singer, starring Al Jolson, and Blue Skies was one of the songs chosen for this legendary event. So Irving Berlin added the first talkie to his list of achievements. He also demonstrated in that year his generosity to other songwriters, and he did a friend a favour, which was to benefit music substantially. Ray Gertz, his brother-in-law from his first marriage to Dorothy, showed him a script for a show called Paris. Essentially, this was a showcase for his wife, who was a singer called Irene Berlin. And Ray asked Irving if he'd write the score. Irving turned him down, flat. He said, no, the man to write this score is Cole Porter. The show opened at Berlin's Music Box Theatre in October of 1928 and included the ageless Let's Do It. The rest, I think, is very much history. Cole Porter, it was the turning point of Cole Porter's Broadway career. A son, Irving Berlin Jr., was born to the Berlins on December the 1st, 1928. Tragically, the baby was found dead in its cot on Christmas Day. So much for Blue Skies. The only saving grace was that the tragic event reunited Ellen and her father, Clarence Mackay. Berlin enclosed himself in his work. Ever the businessman after the jazz singer, he recognised that the next step in his career was definitely towards films, towards Hollywood. So he started writing individual songs for films. And in 1929, he wrote Putting on the Ritz for the film of the same name, very much a taste of things to come. Have you seen the well-to-do up on Lenox Avenue, on that famous thoroughfare, with their noses in the air, high hats and colored collars, white spats and $15, spending every dime for a wonderful time. If you're blue and you don't know where to go to, why don't you go where Harlem sits, putting on the Ritz. Spangled gowns, Bon Iver, your high browns from down the levee, your misfits, putting on the Ritz. That's where each and every Lula Bell goes, every Thursday evening with her swell bows rubbing elbows. Come with me and we'll attend their jubilee and see them spend their last 2 bits, putting on the Ritz. Each and every Luna Bell goes, every Thursday evening with her swell bows rubbing elbows. Come with me and we'll attend their jubilee and see them spend their last 2 bits, putting on the Ritz, putting on the Ritz, putting on the Ritz, putting on the Ritz. Thank you. On October the 30th, 1929, the headline on the front of Variety read, Wall Street lays an egg. Berlin lost a fortune in the crash, the equivalent to about $50 million today. Coincidentally, the biggest loser was his father-in-law, Clarence Mackay. He had actually sold his postal telegraph business 3 months before the crash and had taken shares as payment. He lost everything. During the 1930s, he was bailed out by Berlin, his erstwhile foe, to the tune of $500,000. Berlin had thought he was finally financially secure. Now, suddenly, he had to start again. But he couldn't. He was suffering writer's block. It had never happened before. The shock of Wall Street, so close after the death of his son, had taken its toll on his self-confidence. His published song output for 1930 and 31 is just 8 songs. Not bad by most people's standards, but pretty terrible by Berlin's. Typically what he'd do was he'd write a song, he'd look at it and he'd say, no, it's no good, it's terrible. And he'd put it in the trunk. In the spring of 1931, Sam Harris, remember Berlin's partner in the music box, introduced him to a 29-year-old Moss Hart. And together, they started to write a new revue called Face the Music. Berlin had to produce the goods. The show opened in mid-February 1932, and it hit out at the turmoil of the Depression that had followed the crash. The show was well received by the critics. As brilliant a Broadway lampoon as ever laughed at trouble, wrote one critic. The score is out of Irving Berlin's Top Shelf. Why worry when skies are grey? Why should we complain? Let's laugh at a cloudy day. Let's sing in the rain. Songwriters say that a storm quickly passes, that's their philosophy. They see the world through rose-colored glasses. Why shouldn't we? Just around the corner, there's a rainbow in the sky. So let's have another cup of coffee, and let's have another piece of pie. Trouble's just a bubble, and the clouds will soon roll by. So let's have another cup of coffee, and let's have another piece of pie. Let a smile be your umbrella, and it's just an April shower. Even John D. Rockefeller is looking for the silver lining. Mr. Herbert Hoover says that now's the time to buy. So let's have another cup of coffee, and let's have another piece of pie. Long as there's you, long as there's me, long as the best things in life are free. I say it's spinach and the hell with it. The hell with it, that's all. Long as I'm yours, long as you're mine, long as there's love and a moon to shine. I say it's spinach and the hell with it. The hell with it, that's all. There must be rain to pitter patter. Things don't come on a silver platter. What does it matter? Long as there's you, long as there's me, long as the best things in life are free. I say it's spinach and the hell with it. The hell with it, that's all. So let's have another cup of coffee, and let's have another piece of pie. They say that one swallow doesn't make a summer. And even after the success of the show, Berlin still didn't have his old confidence back. In August 1933, Max Winslow, his friend and partner, and indeed the best man at his wedding, he was the guy who came up with the $2, he was very worried about Irving's state of mind, and he went behind his back with one of his songs, a supposedly worthless Berlin song, and he sent it to Rudy Valley. The song was called Say It Isn't So. Valley sang it in his coast-to-coast broadcast, and it was an overnight sensation. Encouraged, Berlin took another discarded song out of his trunk. How Deep is the Ocean? This became an even bigger hit than Say It Isn't So. He was back. At the end of the summer, he returned to New York to work on a second show with Moss Hart. This would be an even bigger hit. It was called As Thousands Cheer. How much do I love you? I'll tell you no lie. How deep is the ocean? How high is the sky? How many times a day do I think of you? How many roses sprinkled with dew. How far would I travel to be where you are? How far is the journey from here to a star? And if I ever lost you, how much would I cry? How deep is the ocean? Maybe it's because I love you too much. Maybe that is why my love means so little. Maybe when I answered yes, maybe I became a bore. Maybe if I loved you less, maybe you would love me more. Maybe it's because I kissed you too much. Maybe that is why my kiss means so little. Maybe with a love so great and a love so small, maybe I'll be left with no love at all. Say it isn't so. Say it isn't so. Everyone is saying you don't love me. Say it isn't so. Everywhere I go, everyone I know whispers that you're growing tired of me. Say it isn't so. People say that you found somebody new, and it won't be long before you leave me. Say it isn't true. Say that everything is still okay. That's all I want to know. And what they're saying, say it isn't so. And if I ever lost you, how much would I cry? How deep is the ocean? How high is the sky? Sorry about that. The weather is frightening, the thunder and lightning seem to be having their way. But as far as I'm concerned, it's a lovely day. A turn in the weather will keep us together, so I can honestly say that as far as I'm concerned, it's a lovely day, and everything's okay. Isn't it a lovely day to be caught in the rain? You were going on your way, now you've got to remain. Just as You were going, leaving me all at sea. The clouds broke, they broke, and oh, what a break for me. I can see the sun up high, though we're caught in a storm. I can see where you and I could be cozy and warm. Let the rain pitter-patter, 'cause it really doesn't matter if the skies are grey. Long as I can be with you, it's a lovely day. I just got an invitation through the mails. Your presence requested this evening, it's formal, top hat and white tie and tails. Nothing now could take the wind out of my sails. Because I'm invited to step out this evening in top hat and white tie and tails. I'm putting on my top hat, tying up my white tie, brushing up my tails. I'm doing up my shirt front, polishing the shirt studs, polishing my nails. Heaven, I'm in heaven, and my heart beats so that I can hardly speak. And I seem to find the happiness I seek when we're out together dancing cheek to cheek. Heaven, I'm in heaven, and the cares that hang around me through the week seem to vanish like a gambler's lucky streak when we're out together dancing cheek to cheek. No strings, no connections, no ties to my affections. I'm fancy free and free for anything fancy. No dates that can't be broken, no words that can't be spoken, especially when I am feeling romancy. Like a robin upon a tree, like a sailor that goes to sea, like an unwritten melody, I'm free, that's me. Bring on the big attraction, my decks are cleared for action. I'm fancy free and free for anything fancy. I'm stepping out, my dear, to breathe an atmosphere that simply reeks with class. And I trust that you'll excuse my dust when I step on the gas, for I'll be there, putting down my top hat, mussing up my white tie, dancing in my tails, dancing in my tails, dancing in my tails, dancing in my tails. In 1935, Berlin went to Hollywood and did all the music for the Fred Astaire Ginger Rogers movie Top Hat, from which that came. Many people believe that this was the best black and white musical ever filmed. This was Berlin in top form. It was also the start of a famous friendship between Berlin and Astaire. Berlin said that Fred Astaire puts over a song better than anyone I know, and that he couldn't have written the music if it hadn't been for Fred and Ginger. Berlin was hot property. He immediately started work on songs for the 1936 film Follow the Fleet, more hits. I've been a roaming Romeo, my Juliets have been many, but now my roaming days have gone. Too many irons in the fire is worse than not having any. I've had my share, and from now on, I'm putting all my eggs in one basket. I'm betting everything I've got on you. I'm giving all my love to one baby. Lord help me if my baby don't come through. I've got a great big amount saved up in my love account, and honey, I've decided love divided in two won't do, so I'm putting all my eggs in one basket. I'm betting everything I've got on you. There may be trouble ahead, but while there's moonlight and music and love and romance, let's face the music and dance. fiddlers have fled before they ask us to pay the bill, and while we still have a chance, let's face the music and dance. Soon we'll be without the moon, humming a different tune, and then there may be teardrops to shed. So while there's moonlight and music and love and romance, let's face the music and dance, dance. Let's face the music. I'm betting everything I've got. I'm betting everything I've got. I'm betting everything I've got on you. So what was Berlin like as a man? Well, the following is an extract from an interview of Sam Berman by Benny Green. Pandro S. Berman, known as Sam or Pan to his friends, was the man responsible for bringing four of the greatest songwriters to work in Hollywood during the 1930s. That was Jerome Kern, George Gershwin, Cole Porter, and Irving Berlin. According to Green, all I wished to hear from Berman was his recollection of the songwriters with whom he had worked. I said, what was Kern like? Oh, Jerry, yeah, he was fine, no trouble at all. And the Gershwins? Oh, yeah, they were a pair of very nice gents. Very educated. What about Porter? Nice guy. Lot of dough. No trouble, though. What about Berlin? Berman became very thoughtful, and he glanced over his shoulder and then said with a faintly conspiratorial expression on his face, "Turn the machine off." Berman then began to describe his experiences with Berlin. He said he was fine, he's a great writer, but Irving was a difficult man. Green asked him how he was difficult, and Berman went on to describe an incident that had happened just after the Follow the Fleet had been completed. Berman had thrown a party, which Berlin had attended, and towards the end of the evening, something unusual happened. It rained in Beverly Hills. Berlin asked Berman if he could borrow a coat. Berman and Berlin were sort of near enough about the same height, and it so happened that Berman had just bought himself a brand new overcoat, which he hadn't yet worn. But being a generous soul, he lent it to Berlin. Time passed. Follow the Fleet was released, and Berlin moved to 20th Century Fox to work on the music for On the Avenue. At this point, something unusual happened. It rained in Beverly Hills. Berman looked for his overcoat. It wasn't there. Then he remembered he'd lent it to Irving. Great. He phoned him up. He said, Berlin insisted that he'd sent it back the next day with his driver. A silly argument ensued, with Berlin finally saying, "Hey, who needs an overcoat? Listen, Pan, I don't need any overcoat." So they parted in a condition which Woodhouse would have described as not altogether gruntled. When he'd finished, he said, "So you see, Berlin could be difficult." Green was killing himself with laughter, while Berman looked very serious. Green asked, "So what did you say when you heard the song?" "What are you talking about? What song?" said Berman. In the 40 years which had transpired since the event, Berman hadn't realized that Berlin had used the dispute as an inspiration for the lyrics of a middle section of a song he was then writing for On the Avenue. This is the song. Spot the lyrics Sam Berman remarkably missed. The snow is snowing The wind is blowing, and I can weather the storm. What do I care how much it may storm? I've got my love to keep me warm. I can't remember a worse December. Just watch those icicles form. What do I care if icicles form? I've got my love to keep me warm. Middle 8. Off with my overcoat, off with my glove. I need no overcoat, I'm burning with love. My heart's on fire, the flame goes higher, so I will weather the storm. What do I care how much it may storm? I've got my love to keep me, just my love to keep me. I've got my love to keep me warm. Well, I don't know how he missed it, frankly. When Sam Berman realised what Berlin had done, all he could say to Benny Green was, "The son of a bitch." Following on from On the Avenue, which starred Dick Powell and Madeleine Carroll, Berlin did the music for another Astaire film called Carefree, released in 1938, which contained this superb number. Must you dance every dance with the same fortunate man? You have danced with him since the music began. Won't you change partners and dance with me? Must you dance quite so close with your lips touching his face? Can't you see I'm longing to be in his place? Won't you change partners and dance with me? Ask him to sit this one out, and while you're alone, I'll tell the waiter to tell him he's wanted on the telephone. You've been loved in his arms ever since, heaven knows when. Won't you change partners, and then you may never want to change partners again. You may never want to change partners again. When the war started in 1939, even though the US wasn't involved, patriotic fervour ran high, and Berlin resurrected a number which he'd originally written in 1918 for Yip Yip Ya Fank, but which he'd rejected at the time. It's a great title, isn't it? The song was God Bless America. It became America's second national anthem. Ironically, or maybe fittingly, it never earned Berlin a cent. All of the proceeds from the moment it was published went to the Boy Scout movement of America, and have done ever since. He was an intense patriot, and he never forgot the country that had enabled him to achieve quite so much. When America did enter the war after Pearl Harbor, he sought to do his bit by creating another show, similar to the one in the First World War, and it was called This Is the Army. And in late 1943, Berlin and the show went on tour all over Europe, finishing in June 1944, when a very tired 55-year-old songwriter returned to New York. In the show, he reprised his 1918 tune, Oh How I Hate to Get Up in the Morning, and he wrote some nice new tunes to go with it as well. left my heart at the stage door canteen. I left it there with a girl named Eileen. I kept her serving donuts till all she had were gone. I sat there dunking donuts till she got on. I must go back to the army routine, and every doughboy knows what that will mean. A soldier boy without a heart has 2 strikes on him from the start. My heart's at the stage door canteen. I'm getting tired so I can sleep. I want to sleep so I can dream. I want to dream so I can be with you. I've got your picture by my bed. 'Twill soon be placed beneath my head to keep me company the whole night through. For a little while, whatever befalls, I will see you smile till reveille calls. I hope you're tired enough to sleep, and please sleep long enough to dream. And look for me, for I'll be dreaming too. It's impossible to cover the story of Irving Berlin without mentioning one particular song, which he wrote in 1940. It was written for a film called Holiday Inn, starring Bing Crosby, and it became the biggest selling song in music history. Written as it was in the middle of the war, it struck a chord with families separated at Christmas, and perhaps it was the concept of a Christmas like the ones I used to know. Anyway, it's been synonymous with Christmas ever since. I'm dreaming of a white Christmas, just like the ones I used to know, where the treetops glisten and children listen to hear sleigh bells in the snow. I'm dreaming of a white Christmas, with every Christmas card I write. May your days be merry and bright, and may all your Christmases be white. After the war had finished in 1945, Berlin considered slowing down. After all, he didn't need to work. He was 57 now, and still somewhat weary after his recent European excursion. All of his plans changed in November, when Berlin's long-standing friend, the legendary songwriter Jerome Kern, died suddenly. Kern had been about to start writing a music for a show called Annie Get Your Gun, and the producers, Rodgers and Hammerstein, approached Berlin and asked him to take over. Rodgers, by the way, had 20 years to forget about the Blue Skies by now. After much cajoling, Berlin agreed, and the show opened in May 1946. The critics didn't like it very much, but the audience did. Rumors fly, you can't tell where they start, especially when it concerns a person's heart. I've heard tales that could set my heart aglow. Wish I knew if the things I hear are so. They say that falling in love is wonderful. It's wonderful, so they say. And with the moon up above, it's wonderful. It's wonderful, so they tell me. I can't recall who said it. No, I never read it. I only know they tell me that love is grand. And the thing that's known as romance is wonderful, wonderful in every way, so they say. The butcher, the baker, the grocer and the clerk are secretly unhappy men because the butcher, the baker, the grocer and the clerk are paid for what they do with no applause. They'd gladly bid their dreary jobs goodbye for anything theatrical, and why? There's no business like show business. There's no business I know. Everything about it is appealing. Everything the traffic will allow. Nowhere do you get that happy feeling when you are stealing that extra bow. There's no people like show people. They smile when they are down. Even when the turkey that you know will fold, you may get stranded out in the cold. Still you wouldn't change it for a sack of gold. Let's go on with the show. "1948 saw Berlin back in Hollywood again, working yet again with Fred Astaire, but this time, for the first time, with Judy Garland. The film was Easter Parade. The title song had been written for A Thousand Cheer as far back as 1933, since when it had gathered dust in the trunk. In truth, it had a much older pedigree, having started life with the somewhat unlikely opening line of "Smile and show your dimple." Good, huh? Back in 1917. Working with the stars was certainly fruitful. We're a couple of swells, we stop at the best hotels, but we prefer that country far away from the city smells. We're a couple of sports, the pride of the tennis courts. In June, July and August we look cute when we're dressed in shorts. The Vanderbilts have asked us out to tea. We don't know how we'll get there, no, sorry. We would drive up the avenue, but we haven't got the price. We would skate up the avenue, but there isn't any ice. We would ride on a bicycle, but we haven't got the bike. So we'll walk up the avenue, yes, we'll walk up the avenue, yes, we'll walk up the avenue's what we'll like. Stepping out with my baby, can't be wrong 'cause I'm right. It's for sure, don't be maybe, I'm all dressed up tonight. Stepping out with my honey, can't be bad, feels so good. Never felt quite so sunny, and I keep on knocking wood. There'll be smooth sailing 'cause I'm trimming my sails, in my top hat and my white tie and my tails. Stepping out with my baby, can't be wrong 'cause I'm right. Ask me when will the day be, the big day might be tonight. We would sail up the avenue, but we haven't got a yacht. We would drive up the avenue, but the horse we had was shot. We would ride on a trolley car, but we haven't got the fare. So we'll walk up the avenue, yes, we'll walk up the avenue, yes, we'll walk up the avenue. Walk up the avenue's what we like. It also contained this gem. For every rose that withers and dies, another blooms in its stead. A new love waits to open its eyes after the old love is dead. That sounds all right in a careless rhyme, but there's seldom a second time. Better luck next time, that could never be, because there ain't gonna be no next time. No siree, made up my mind to make a brand new start. I've made my mind up, but I can't make up my heart. I'd like a new lucky day. That would be nice, but this comes just once in a lifetime, not twice. So don't say better luck next time, that could never be, because there ain't gonna be no next time for me. In 1949, Berlin did the music for a show called Miss Liberty, directed by his erstwhile collaborator, Moss Hart. It was a bit of a flag waver, and it didn't go down very well. According to his daughter, Berlin did feel that it could be rescued, but he never quite got round to it. Instead, he moved on to do a new show in 1950, Call Me Madam. This starred Ethel Merman, and it ran for twice as long as Miss Liberty, to critical acclaim. It contains a fine example of counterpoint, and Berlin really did enjoy counterpoint. He may not have been able to play the piano, but my God, did he enjoy the music forms. It's difficult to demonstrate this because I can't clone my voice. However, due to the wonders of modern technology, I have come up with a way of demonstrating his fine ability with this musical form. And in fact, I chose an earlier song from 1914, from the hit musical there, Watch Your Step. It's a song called Play a Simple Melody. So, with the help of my piano, if it works. Thank you. In 1962, Berlin wrote his last show, Mr. President. It was a flop, lasting only 265 performances. And from 1963, Berlin worked on and off for MGM on a film called Say It With Music, directed by Arthur Freed. Now, Arthur Freed was probably one of the greatest directors of musicals. He did Gigi, Kismet, Showboat, Annie Get Your Gun, and a host of others as well. Well, for once, the project didn't really seem to work, and it dragged on, and it cost millions without ever being finished. And eventually, in 1969, the film was cancelled by MGM. Berlin was paid $1 million for his completed score, but in his own words, he'd much rather they'd made the picture. It was to be Arthur's and my swan song in motion pictures. Berlin retired. He became virtually a recluse, spending most of his time indulging his passion for painting. When he was 95, Steven Spielberg visited him and asked to use the tune Always in a film he was doing. Berlin's response was somewhat typical when he said, "I'm sorry, I've got plans for that." Maybe he just remembered that he'd assigned the rights to Ellen back in 1926. The film, of course, was called Always, and it starred Richard Dreyfuss and Holly Hunter, and it was released in 1989. And it was about fighting forest fires. I don't know whether any of you ever saw it. But it's always amused me that after Spielberg was rebuffed by Berlin, some smart individual chose as the love theme for this film about fires Jerome Kern, Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. How very appropriate. Irving Berlin died in 1989, aged 101, and it was just over a year after his beloved Ellen had died, at the ripe old age of 84. Berlin was, without doubt, the most prolific and successful songwriter of the 20th century, with over 1,600 songs written, 800 published, 400 hits spread over 60 years of career. When asked what Irving Berlin's place in American music was, Jerome Kern said, "Irving Berlin has no place in American music. He is American music." Gershwin dubbed Berlin America's Franz Schubert. Unlike Schubert, Berlin didn't leave very much unfinished. But he did leave a lot unpublished. This evening has focused very much on the songs for which Berlin is well known, but he wrote many excellent songs which are not so well known, and I'd like to finish the evening with a medley of 4 lesser songs. 2 were from the doomed Say It With Music film of the 1960s, and 2 from a 1948 show called Stars on My Shoulders, which was never released. Poets love to sing of Paris in the spring. They say it's something that you can't conceive. I don't know a thing of Paris in the spring. I've never been abroad, but I believe. A beautiful day in Brooklyn is more beautiful than a beautiful day in any other place. When the sun comes shining through over Flatbush Avenue, you wake up with a smile on your face. The weatherman doesn't have to say it's beautiful. When you open your window, everything's okay. If a tree that grows in Brooklyn could speak, it would say that a beautiful day in Brooklyn is the most beautiful day. You love me, and I don't doubt it, but you don't have to shout it. Whisper it in my ear. I just love to hear you tell it, but you don't have to yell it. Whisper it in my ear. Pin that medal of merit on my chest, but please soft pedal the talking bit that goes with it. You can shout from all the housetops, but I won't hear unless you whisper it, baby. Whisper it in my ear. I don't care who takes you to the party, baby. I don't care long as I can take you home. I don't care just who you go with, just who it might be. I don't care how much you're with him, long as you wind up with me. I don't care how long you keep me waiting, baby. I won't leave till the band plays Home Sweet Home. Baby, give him all the dances at the party, baby. But save your kisses for when I take you. Save your kisses for when I take you. Save your kisses for when I take you home. Funny when you're left with nothing more to say. Suddenly you find you should be on your way. Funny how you long for some excuse to remain a while, but it's no use. The conversation ends and you've nothing more to say. Funny when you're left without a thought on your mind. Funny when you search for words you never can find. Gone are the pretty speeches that you learned for your lucky day. Funny when you're left with nothing more to say. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.